I didn't know my marriage was a bet. $5 million. That's what I was worth to him. A billionaire heir, his elite friends, their champagne laughs behind closed doors. They thought marrying a black woman like me was a joke, a social stunt. Something they could watch play out for entertainment. While they laughed, I stood beside him, not knowing I was the punchline. What they didn't know was that I was listening, watching, learning how their world really works. Because while he thought he was using me to win a bet, I was studying every weakness, every rule, every lie, and by the time high society realized I wasn't the fool in this marriage, my revenge would hit them where it hurt most: reputation, money, and status. If you're loving this story, hit subscribe, give it a like, and drop a comment. I want to hear what you do. The day I walked down that aisle, I didn't know my life had already become someone else's bet. Julian Ashford smiled at me, his white teeth gleaming, perfectly tailored tucks on his broad shoulders. A billionaire heir, the golden boy of high society, and completely convinced he was in control. Behind him, the marble columns and crystal chandeliers reflected the world I had just stepped into. A world of privilege, wealth, and whispers. His friends clinked champagne glasses, toasting to what they called the perfect experiment. Their laughter, high-pitched, delicate, and utterly cruel, floated over the orchestra music like a warning I didn't yet understand. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role. They didn't know I was observing every detail, every glance, every smirk, every silent calculation. The ceremony passed in a blur of silk, roses, and handshakes. But at the reception, things got interesting. I noticed the subtle looks exchanged across tables, the brief whispers just low enough to be private, the way Julian's friends leaned in when they thought I wasn't watching. They thought marrying me, a black woman from outside their world, was a social stunt, something amusing to watch over crystal flutes and caviar platters, something to gossip about in their private clubs. And while they laughed, I stood beside him, perfectly still, not knowing yet that I was the punchline of the richest, most elite bet in the city. But I did notice a pattern. The way Julian's hand twitched slightly when someone complimented me. The way his smile faltered when I casually mentioned my own accomplishments. He thought his charm masked the disdain, but I was cataloging every moment, every weakness, every lie. By the time the first toast ended, I had already started planning, not in anger, not in haste, but in cold, meticulous observation. If he thought he could manipulate the rules of high society, and me along with it, he had another thing coming. Because the game had just begun, and even I didn't fully know yet just how far I could take it. I overheard a conversation between Julian and one of his friends that didn't sound like celebration. It sounded like a wager, and it included me. I replayed the words over and over in my head. 5 million says she won't last the year. The chill didn't hit me immediately. At first I thought I'd misheard. But no, the whispers, the smirks, the subtle glances between Julian and his friends, it all clicked. My life wasn't mine. It was a wager, a game, and I was the prize. $5 million. That's what I had been worth to him before I even unpacked my first box in his penthouse, before I smiled at his friends, before I said I do, before I even realized how hollow this gilded cage really was. And Julian He had no idea I knew, not yet. He thought the perfect bride was someone who would bend, who would play along, who wouldn't notice the real game. But I wasn't that girl. The reception faded into a blur of laughter and champagne. I excused myself to the balcony, pretending I was taking a breath. In reality, I was calculating. Watching the city lights, thinking, everything they think they control, they don't. And soon, they'll find out. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Julian, not yet. Not publicly. I needed to understand the rules of his world first. I started asking questions, casually, in conversation. Subtle ones, about his business, his friends, the elite clubs he frequented. I listened more than I spoke. I observed everything, the way favors were traded, the little secrets everyone assumed no one else noticed. And then I called Marcus, my oldest friend, my silent strategist. Someone who had always seen the world the way I did, layered, tactical, waiting for the right moment. "Marcus," I whispered over the phone, keeping my voice steady. "They think this is a game. They think I'm just the bride in the spotlight. But I see the entire board." He didn't say anything at first, just let me speak, and as I outlined what I knew, Julian's arrogance, the wager, the fragile alliances, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. Power, control. The sweet, intoxicating taste of a plan forming. By the end of the night, I wasn't just the bride in a bet. I was a player, ready to flip the entire game. And the first move? Observation. Collection. Strategy. Everything they thought they controlled would eventually belong to me. I had their secret, and they had no idea the person they'd bet against was already planning her first strike. The morning after the revelation of the bet, I woke up in Julian's penthouse with a cityscape of skyscrapers and golden sun glinting off the glass. Everything about this life looked perfect on the surface. But I knew better. Perfection in high society was always a mask. I watched Julian that day, carefully. Every gesture, every smirk, every command he barked at his assistants, every subtle glance he exchanged with his friends. They didn't notice me. They never did. Not truly. But I was learning, cataloging, and connecting dots they didn't even know existed. At brunch, I observed his friends. Mira and Leonard, the socialites who thought their status granted them omniscience, whispered behind crystal flutes. Julian laughed, oblivious, but I caught phrases, tiny slips that revealed insecurities, rivalries, and secrets. Every word was a thread I could pull later. I even started studying the way the elite moved in public, how influence was measured in invitations, discreet favors, and the silent hierarchy of luxury. They believed wealth alone kept them untouchable. They hadn't met someone like me before. By mid-afternoon, I'd made my first mental map: who influenced whom, who depended on Julian, and who resented him secretly. And for the first time, I smiled, not out of joy, but because I realized the game had already shifted. That evening, Julian tried to flaunt his power at a small cocktail party. He introduced me as the perfect addition to my life, his words dripping with pride and ego. The elites clapped politely, some exchanging subtle smirks. But I didn't react. I observed. A minor slip. One guest, a financier named Crawford, muttered under his breath about Julian's risky investment. Another, Mira, cast a glance that said, "She doesn't belong here." I noted it all, every micro-expression, every whispered doubt, every flaw. By the time the night ended, I had already started planning my first moves. Not openly, not yet, but silently, calculated, precise. Because I realized the truth. They had all underestimated me. They had thought I would be a passive participant, but the real game wasn't Julian's. It was mine. And the first strike, patience, observation, knowing the rules better than the players. By the time Julian realized I wasn't just playing along, I would already know exactly how to bring his carefully crafted world crashing down. By the 4th week of my new life, I had already memorized patterns, habits, and weaknesses no one thought I'd notice. Julian's world glittered like gold, but underneath, it was brittle, and I intended to exploit every crack. I started small. Notes jotted on my phone disguised as reminders, whispered snippets from his friends, the quiet panic behind his forced smiles, all cataloged. Every detail mattered. The way Mira tilted her head when Julian bragged about his wealth, the slight hesitation of Leonard when he mentioned a new acquisition, even the subtle envy hidden behind polite laughter. Then came Marcus, my oldest friend, my secret weapon, financial whiz, strategist, someone who never blinked at risk. We met discreetly in a quiet cafe, away from Julian's golden empire. I see it, I told him, showing him the snippets I'd collected, the arrogance, the blind spots, the bet. It's not just about me. They've underestimated every single weakness in his empire. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that meant trouble, in the best way possible. Then we make them pay attention, but smart, not rash. Everything they value, we turn it against them. Over the next days, I began gathering more concrete evidence. Contracts, investment slips, hush-hush financial arrangements, little mistakes Julian made that no one in high society would notice unless someone like me connected the dots. Every lie, every overreach, every hidden favor was another thread I could pull. But I didn't just collect papers. I observed behavior. How Julian flinched when a rival mentioned market volatility. How Mira's perfect smile faltered when a secret investor was mentioned. How his so-called friends whispered about loopholes he thought were invisible. I cataloged everything meticulously, cross-referencing with my own knowledge and Marcus's expertise. This wasn't revenge yet. This was preparation. The difference between a child throwing a tantrum and a master strategist is patience. By the end of that week, I had a blueprint. Every flaw, every ally, every secret, it was mapped, and I knew exactly when and how I would strike. Because the elites thought they were untouchable. They thought a black woman could never navigate their world. They were wrong. By the next gala, Julian wouldn't just notice me. He would see that the woman he married for a bet had already started dismantling everything he thought was untouchable. The night of the Ashford Gala, the city skyline shimmered like a field of diamonds, but inside, the room was a different kind of glitter, a glitter of egos, whispered alliances, and fragile reputations. I stepped out of the limousine, my dress a sleek black silk that hugged curves Julian had always ignored, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Every eye turned, not just to Julian's wife, but to me. And for the first time, the room didn't feel entirely his. Julian noticed immediately. His smirk faltered. The arrogance in his posture wavered for the briefest fraction of a second. That's all I needed. Inside, the chatter buzzed. Elite guests leaned in to observe. Whispered speculations flitted across tables. I moved with grace, acknowledging nods with perfect poise. Each gesture, each glance calculated, Subtle power. Julian tried to regain control. "Naomi, darling," he called, his tone overly familiar, rehearsed. "Are you enjoying the evening?" I smiled, a slow, measured smile. "Absolutely," I said, letting a hint of irony drip from the word. It's fascinating to see who's really in charge of their own reputations tonight. The room shifted. A subtle pause. Heads turned. Whispers floated. Julian's friends exchanged glances. He didn't know whether to laugh or panic. Then Marcus appeared beside me, seamlessly part of the gala, casual and confident. He gave me a single nod, our silent signal. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The first public crack wasn't a scandal, not yet. It was a glance, a misstep, a whispered observation. Julian's carefully curated guests were already questioning him. Mira's perfect composure flickered into anxiety. Board members subtly distanced themselves, their eyes following me instead of Julian. I moved through the room like a shadow and a spotlight all at once. No confrontations, no shouting, just presence, control. By the end of the evening, Julian realized something he hadn't accounted for. I wasn't just his wife. I was a force. And he had underestimated me. One careless smile from Julian, and the smallest whisper could unravel his entire reputation. And I was ready to make it happen. The morning after the gala, I woke up to the city humming below me. Julian probably slept soundly, convinced the evening had gone exactly as planned. But he was wrong. I reviewed my notes from the night before. Every glance, every whisper, every tiny fracture I had observed in his circle. The elites thought they were untouchable, insulated by wealth and legacy. But the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Marcus and I worked quickly. We traced Julian's investments, his discreet loans, and off-the-record deals. We found small gaps, overlooked risks, favors traded for silence, and miscalculations he had assumed invisible. Each one was a thread, and I intended to pull every single one. At brunch, I casually mentioned a new strategy to a mutual acquaintance in finance. My words seemed innocent, almost conversational, but the seed was planted. Soon, murmurs about Julian's empire began circulating. Not loudly, not yet, but quietly enough that the right ears would hear. Meanwhile, I perfected my public persona, the flawless wife, the poised socialite. No one could suspect the storm I was building. Every smile, every polite nod, every carefully placed compliment to the wrong person at the right moment, a weapon. By evening, I had orchestrated a subtle ripple through Julian's network. An anonymous tip here, a discreet question there. Financial analysts and board members began noticing inconsistencies in his ventures. Julian himself remained blissfully unaware, flaunting confidence as if nothing had changed. Mira, on the other hand, was crumbling in subtle ways. The slight hesitation when she tried to assert herself, the way her eyes darted to me when Julian praised her in front of guests, it was deliciously telling. She had always believed she was untouchable too. And me? I was everywhere and nowhere at once. The perfect wife on the surface, the strategist underneath. By controlling whispers and observations, I had started reshaping perceptions without a single confrontation. By the time Julian realized the ripple effect of my subtle maneuvers, it would be too late. His empire wouldn't crumble overnight, but cracks would appear, and the right people would notice first. Every favor, every misstep, every hidden secret was now in my hands. And soon, the first domino would fall. Julian would never see it coming. The next gala was even grander than the last. Crystal chandeliers, tuxedos, champagne flowing like rivers, and Julian strutting through the room like a king. He believed the night belonged entirely to him. I arrived with Marcus at my side, calm and poised, every movement calculated. My dress was subtle, elegant, but with a presence Julian couldn't ignore. As we entered, a hush fell over the room. Not because of me, not yet, but because the energy had shifted. Eyes that had once admired Julian now flicked toward me. He spotted me immediately. His smirk tightened. That familiar arrogance wavered just enough to show a crack. I let my gaze meet his briefly, unflinching, and the message was clear. I knew everything, and I had power he hadn't anticipated. Julian moved through his guests, attempting charm, but I could see him adjusting his approach mid-conversation, subtly, nervously. Mira tried to help, clinging to her perfect smile, but even she faltered when I exchanged a polite nod with influential board members. Those nods weren't social pleasantries, they were signals. Connections that Julian assumed were his alone now noticed me. At dinner, I allowed a small comment to slip, casual yet pointed, about one of Julian's investments. It wasn't aggressive, just enough for the right people to overhear. A few heads tilted, whispers passed along tables. Julian's confident laugh sounded forced, almost hollow. Then Marcus leaned in, a subtle smile on his lips. Our plan was unfolding perfectly. Every thread we had pulled over the past weeks was now visible to the right eyes. Julian could feel the room slipping, but he didn't know why. Even Mira noticed. Her laughter trembled. Her perfect posture wavered. The social elite began exchanging looks. Their curiosity piqued. They hadn't witnessed scandal yet, but the tension was unmistakable. And tension was exactly what I needed. By the end of the night, Julian realized, too late, that the dynamics had changed. He was no longer in full control. A wife he had married for a bet had silently turned the tables. Julian's world hadn't collapsed yet, but the first domino had fallen, and I was already planning the next move. One mistake from him, one slip from his allies, and the house of cards would start tumbling. The morning after the gala, the city below gleamed as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Julian believed the evening had been another show of his control. He was wrong. I reviewed my notes from the gala. Every glance, every whisper, every flicker of doubt I'd observed, catalogued. Every interaction with the elites, every hesitant nod from his allies, every flicker of envy from Mira, it all told the same story. Julian's grip was slipping. Marcus and I started coordinating behind the scenes. One subtle message to a financier here, a quietly shared observation with an influential board member there. Nothing overt, just enough to seed doubt and curiosity. We didn't need to expose him outright, yet, just enough for the ripple to spread. I reached out to a few key allies of Julian's circle under the guise of casual conversation. Polite, controlled, unassuming. I heard about this new investment, I said softly, letting them lean in. It's fascinating, though some numbers seem unusual. That single comment, overheard, passed along. By the afternoon, murmurs were circulating about discrepancies. Only someone close to the inner circle would notice. Meanwhile, Julian strutted through his offices and social circles, unaware. Mira tried to bolster his ego with rehearsed laughter and forced flattery that cracks were appearing. The guests, the colleagues, the investors, they had begun noticing subtle shifts. The room he once dominated now had currents he couldn't control. I stayed calm, poised, smiling politely when necessary. But every smile, every nod, every conversation was a calculated move. I wasn't just present, I was orchestrating perception. Julian's network was starting to doubt him silently, and that doubt is far more dangerous than open confrontation. By evening, I watched as small slips became whispers. A financier questioned one of his past deals. A board member hesitated before supporting a new project. Julian noticed too late, trying to mask it with charm and confidence. But the panic in his eyes betrayed him. And Mira, she was unraveling faster. The tiny tremble in her smile, the slight hesitation before she spoke, the way her eyes darted toward me, everything confirmed my strategy was working. By the time high society fully realized the shift, Julian wouldn't know who to trust, and the first domino would already be tipping. I had planted the seeds, and Julian's empire was already wobbling. The next move would be unavoidable and utterly devastating. The city glittered below as I entered the charity gala, but the real spectacle was inside. Julian believed he still controlled the room. He was wrong. I walked in with Marcus at my side, poised and composed. My dress shimmered subtly under the chandeliers, catching just enough light to draw glances. The whisper started immediately, not about me, but about Julian. They noticed my calm, my confidence, my presence. Julian's eyes found me. His smile was forced, his posture slightly stiff. Mira leaned in, attempting to prop him up with rehearsed charm, but her effort faltered under the weight of my gaze. I let my movements be deliberate, casual, but each step was strategic. Every conversation I engaged in, every nod, every polite laugh, calculated. I wasn't just attending, I was orchestrating perception. Then the moment came. Julian presented a new business venture to a small circle of elite investors. Everyone was watching. Mira hovered, Julian's golden image on display. I approached quietly, feigning interest, but with a subtle remark. Interesting plan. Though I'd love to see the numbers verified, they seem optimistic. Heads turned. Whispers began. A few investors exchanged glances, noting my insight. Julian's confidence wavered. His words stumbled. Mira's forced smile cracked slightly. The room was starting to notice something wasn't right. Marcus discreetly passed me a note with confirmation of minor discrepancies in Julian's numbers, evidence he hadn't accounted for. My lips curved into the smallest smile. The dominoes were tipping. Julian tried to recover, but the subtle panic in his posture betrayed him. Questions began to surface, soft but pointed. The social elite were circling the truth without realizing it. I had planted the first seed of doubt, and it was growing fast. Even Mira's eyes betrayed fear. The woman who once thrived on Julian's shadow was shrinking in mine. Every glance, every whispered murmur, every hesitant nod from investors confirmed the strategy was working. By the end of the evening, Julian understood something terrifying. He was no longer fully in control, and the woman he married as a joke had become the one steering perception. The first strike had landed. The whispers would grow, doubts would spread, and Julian's golden empire was already cracking. But the most devastating moves were still to come. The evening of the high-profile auction had arrived. The room glittered with elites, investors, and socialites, all eager to witness prestige, power, and wealth. But Julian didn't realize the real spectacle wouldn't come from the gavel. I entered quietly, elegant and poised, Marcus just behind me. Every eye was on the room's usual king, Julian Ashford. But tonight, the energy had shifted. I was no longer the passive bride. I was the strategist, the orchestrator, the storm he had ignored until now. Julian began his usual show, speaking with charm, showcasing his investments, and projecting confidence. I smiled politely, letting him parade while carefully dropping subtle hints to those within earshot, whispers of inconsistencies. Discreet nods toward Marcus with documents hidden in plain sight. Then the first murmur rippled through the crowd. A quiet question about one of Julian's ventures. Another investor leaned in, raising a doubt. I stayed calm, serene, allowing curiosity and suspicion to grow. Julian noticed the subtle shift immediately. His confident tone faltered. He gestured to Mira, who tried to recover the moment with forced charm, but it was too late. The room had begun seeing cracks he couldn't fix with charm or wealth. I stepped forward at the perfect moment, presenting a dossier of evidence, contracts, misreported figures, hidden debts, carefully packaged to appear as a casual handover. But in reality, it was the culmination of weeks of observation, planning, and strategy. The crowd gasped. Whispers erupted. The elites, Julian's own allies, scanned the documents, connecting dots Julian had assumed invisible. His smirk disappeared. Panic replaced confidence. Mira's composure shattered. I met Julian's eyes calmly, letting the silence stretch. The humiliation didn't come from yelling, accusations, or theatrics. It came from truth, from exposure, from the undeniable evidence of his arrogance and deceit. By the end of the night, Julian's empire wasn't destroyed, but its foundation had cracked publicly and irreversibly. Reputation, money, and influence, the very pillars he relied on, were now under scrutiny. And I had orchestrated it all. Marcus gave me a subtle nod from across the room. I smiled. The game was over. High society had learned the truth. The woman they dismissed as a bride in a bet was the mastermind behind Julian's first major public downfall. And I had only just begun.